of everything we've studied, Lord, and that it would edify us, that it would build us up, and that it would help us to have a better understanding of your plan for us, as you had a plan for the king, a plan for Saul and a plan for David, Lord. We ask these things in your Son's heavy name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Okay, the title of this lesson is David the Deliverer. Now, David, in these two chapters, there's two things that are delivered. He delivers the city of Keilah, but he also delivers Saul. So we're going to see that as we get into this class. But there's a book written by Booker T. Washington called Up from Slavery, and in that book there's a quote. He says, "I have learned that success is to be measured not so much by the position that one has reached in life as by the obstacles which he has overcome while trying to succeed." And I think by that standard, David was a very successful man. Now, by any standard, he was a successful man because he became the king. But when you look at the obstacles he overcame, he would be considered a successful man, because for 10 years he's on the run. Saul is trying to kill him. He's being treated like an outlaw. I don't think he's an outlaw because he's not an outlaw in God's eyes, but he fought the Lord's battles, he delivered Israel from their enemies, and he lived with his faithful men, the 600 mighty men, in the forsaken places of the land so that they could avoid Saul. And often he had to flee for his life, yet he knew that the Lord would finally deliver him. A lot of times we feel like we're fleeing for our lives. But as long as we remain faithful, the Lord will deliver us. So,
to Dad's point, David might have felt like a rebel. He might have been labeled a rebel. And one of the themes we see in 1 Samuel is this idea of rebellion being sin. And David is as far from a rebel as you can be, and the end of this lesson really makes a poignant point about that.
Okay. So Keilah or Kyla, it can be pronounced either way, and I will probably bounce back and forth because I never can remember which way I pronounced it the last time I spoke it. But it was a border town in Judah. Wasn't very far from Gath even, but it was very close to the Philistines. And because of that, it was an apt place for the Philistines to go and to...
Sorry, trying to find the map.
It's an apt place for the Philistines to go and get food the lazy way. You got the grasshopper and the ant. If the Israelites are the ants and the Philistines are the grasshoppers, they come and steal from the ants. So they would wait till harvest time, and then they would come and raid the threshing floors and steal the food from the Israelites. And that's what's going on. The inhabitants of Keilah are fighting off the Philistines from Gath, and the Lord tells David about it and says, "You need to go and help them." So let's get into this.
So in this chapter 23 and 24, we see themes here that have appeared before in Judges. The first of which is threshing floors. Do you guys remember the judge that was found threshing wheat? Gideon. Do you know where he was threshing wheat? A wine press. It's a very unusual place to thresh wheat. Threshing, the act of, is not very secure. I've got a little video real quick. It's a few seconds long.
If we have any homeschoolers in our audience, you might watch this. It might be something you want to do with your kids, because this is a way
they take wheat, they put it into
wheat.
a bag. This is the threshing. This is removing the grain head from the straw. They beat it. Now, they didn't have pillowcases back then, but they would have beat it in some other way. They would have removed the grain berry from the straw, and then they would have found some way to get that grain berry into the air in order for the wind to blow the chaff away. And they do that enough times that they're left with just the grain berry. Now, they're doing this in front of a box fan that has electricity. if you're in Israel, you're looking for a place that has strong, consistent winds. You can't really do that inside of a walled city, can you? Or you're doing it at the top of the walled city, and that's probably not very safe. But they're going outside the city. They're usually taking very large woven baskets, not like deep baskets, but more like the bottom of a basket. They're throwing wheat into it, and they're tossing it up in the air, and that wind comes along and blows the chaff away, the chaff away, and leaves the grainberry. And so it's something that exposes you to enemies. And so here come the Philistines. It's about that time of year. The Philistines want their free food. We were talking about this before. Why go and pillage the wheat that's in the field? Why go and pillage the grapes that are on the vine when you can wait for the Israelites to do all the work first and then go pillage them? And so that's what they're doing. They're waiting for all the intensive work to be done to this, for the grain to be ready to be ground, and then they're going to come in and steal it.
You don't steal the grapes, you steal the wine. You don't steal the olives, you steal the olive oil. So you let the other guy do all the work first, and then you take their product. So, but Caleb's, always, you would think that Saul would have sent a detachment of men to protect them, but he didn't. He was more concerned with finding David. And he was using his spies to find David. David was using his spies to avoid David. And they both had their own spies. Saul, as the king, had his own set of spies. We saw Doeg, the Edomite, as one of his spies. The king's advantage was he could reward his spies if they told him information he wanted. He could punish people if they withheld information that he wanted. And we saw both of those things happen already. David, on the other hand, he had a different set of spies. He had, his 600 mighty men, but he also had Gad the prophet, who kind of had an inside track with the Lord. He had Abiathar. I'll get that name right in a minute.
I think it's Abiathar.
Well, anyway. And then he had the Lord, but he also had an important one. He had Jonathan was a spy for him. So anyway, David had his spies, Saul had his spies, and they were kind of playing this game of chess, Saul was trying to catch him, David was trying to avoid being caught.
Now remember, David started in a cave in Adullam. He went to the forests of Hereth, and here's Keilah right here. So Gath can get to Keilah probably faster than Gibeah can get to Keilah. And so makes sense that the Philistines are going to be raiding Keilah because their support is going to be far away. The next thing we want to talk about is this conversation that now David has with God. You'll see multiple times in 23 and 24 this, I will give X into your hands, or you will be given so-and-so into my hands. This idea is often that God has the power in order to give you the victory. In this case, in that purple and line on verse 2, go and attack the Philistines and deliver Keilah. Verse 4, arise, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hands. We're going to have multiple people saying this. Some people are going to be saying it that we know are trustworthy, and some people are going to be saying this, and we know they're not trustworthy. And so keep that in mind as we encounter this phrase again and again in this chapter. And so David inquires of the Lord. We're back to the ephod. Remember, we talked about the ephod, we talked about the breastplate, we talked about the Thummim and the Ummim. These stones that help tell yes or no, or help answer yes or no questions. And that's what David asks. Shall I go and attack the Philistines? Go and attack the Philistines and deliver Keilah. Then David inquired of the Lord once more, and the Lord answered him, go and arise to Keilah, for I give the Philistines into your hands.
But then he tells his men that's what he's going to do. And what's their reaction is, hey, you're putting us between the Philistines and Saul. We could get wiped out here. Are you sure that's what the Lord wants us to do? So David doesn't doubt the Lord, but his men are fearful, so he wants to give them a second answer. So he goes to the Lord again.
And so you have this back and forth. David gets a positive answer. He tells the men, we're going to go. The men kind of balk, to use a baseball term. And he asks again, and God says, go. And so they go. And in verse 5, we have the resolution. So David and his men went to Keilah and fought off the Philistines. He led away their livestock and struck them with great slaughter. Thus David delivered the inhabitants of Keilah. The idea of livestock here, the Philistines expect so much bounty that they're going to need beasts of burden to take it home. So David's
Adam and I had a disagreement on this. I think livestock means more and is broader than just beasts of burden. He thinks that's all that the Philistines had. I think that, livestock includes your animals that you milk, your animals you eat, your animals that you get wool from.
Sheep.
Livestock's very broad. You can use a different word for beast of burden, which is they'd have oxen pulling the carts full of the grain and things like that. But the point is, David and his men were rewarded by God for doing what God told them to and defeating the Philistines. And so they had this plunder from defeating the Philistines, and he delivered the inhabitants of Keilah.
And if you remember the previous chapter, the priests of Nob were killed. The only priest that was left alive was Abiathar.
Abiathar.
And Abiathar...
I do have the name Doeg down. So.
You got Doeg. Doeg's easy. But Abiathar is left. Think about it this way. We don't have inconsistent verses here. Abiathar flees the slaughter. He's said he's the only one to survive. And he survives and finds David in the middle of this fight in Keilah. Okay? And so Abiathar flees Nob. And verse 6, now it came about that Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, fled to David at Keilah, and he came down with an ephod in his hand. So we're kind of retconning. We're going back and saying the reason why David could ask these questions of God is because Abiathar is there in Keilah. He has the ephod. He's the priest that can do these things.
But if David had had questions before Abiathar got there with the ephod, he also had Gad the prophet, who could have given him answers if he had asked him. So it's possible that he had given him the answers before Abiathar got there. So anyway, are we going to read the text? Or are we going to... We're just summarizing it, so let's keep going.
All right. So David now delivers his... So David has delivered Keilah. Now it's David's job to deliver his men from Saul. And so when David told Saul that, when it was told Saul that David had come to Keilah, Saul said, God has delivered him into my hands. Here's that phrase again. We'll see it again a couple more times. What's interesting about this? That God there is not Yahweh. He uses the regular term for God, the way you would describe Baal or Yahweh or any of the other Canaanite gods. He doesn't say, Yahweh has delivered him into my hands. He just says, God has delivered him into my hands. Has God delivered David into his hands? No. He's making a complete assumption about what God is intending to do in this case. For he shut himself in by entering a city with double gates and bars. I wrote down here, later on, it says that Saul summoned all his people for war. Saul's great at summoning people for war. We see it right when he is anointed. He cuts up an ox and sends it out to the four corners of Israel and collects his people, and he goes to war. He does a great job of this. He's a great military leader. And this great military leader has just decided to lay siege to one of his own towns in order to capture David. That's how far he's sunk. He's so ready to capture David. He shut himself into a city with two doors. I'm going to lay siege to one of my own cities until I've got David. That's his motive. All right.
So then David inquires of the Lord through Abiathar and his ephod, and he says, is this truly Saul's plan? Is he going to come down here and attack the city of Keilah? And the Lord says, he will come down. And then he says, if he comes down, will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hands of Saul? Now, they had just saved these guys. You'd think they would protect them. But they know what happened to Nob. And the Lord tells him, they will surrender you. So do you think David stays there? Next slide.
One of the words in yellow there, David is really speaking of himself in deference. He pleads for God, or talks to God, O Lord God of Israel, your servant has heard for certain. Verse 11, your servant has heard. Continue on in verse 11. I pray, tell your servant. We'll see time. Now, this is the man who killed Goliath. This is the man who killed 200 Philistines and took trophies from those 200 Philistines in order to marry the king's daughter. We raise this man up in our children's Bible classes as a hero for God. And how does he see himself? As a servant. What's interesting is he's going to talk to God here. He's going to talk to Saul later on in chapter 24. He continues to put himself in a low position, even though we would put him very high. Jonathan would put him as king. His men would put him as king. He puts himself as a servant. And so keep that in mind as we continue to read this. David really puts himself in a low position, and it works out great for him. Not to say that he's being strategic and trying to be cunning, but I think God sees him through this because he's putting himself in the place of a servant. Okay. One last thing. Do you want to go on to the next verse?
Yeah, we can go to the next slide.
Before we get there,
Sure.
Jake and I had an interesting conversation about Calvinism, and that's a can of worms I don't want to eat in class right now.
They had a discussion on how Calvinism relates to David.
That God tells David, this is what's going to happen if you stay here. David actually makes a choice, and you can see David making decisions that are affecting him and his men. If you want to learn more, I would suggest talking to Jake. Because I don't want to start a conversation about Calvinism in the middle of class. But I think it's really interesting. This, and also what you see with Abraham and Lot, and trying to find at least one righteous person in order to save the city, I think are good conversations to have when we talk about predestination and about free will. All right, going on from there. Did you want to start that off, or do you want me?
Well, one of the things I was going to point out in this is verse 16 in this section. Jonathan's, Saul's son, arose and went to David at Horesh and encouraged him in God. Now, that's the New American Version. New International says encouraged, helps him find strength in God. What I want to point out is this is the last time that Jonathan and David spoke to one another, is right here. The next time we see Jonathan is going to be in chapter 31 of 1 Samuel, 31:2, where he's killed in battle. So, he was faithful to David, his friend, close friend, to the end.
So in summary, David and his 600 men get out of the city. You have that verse, or that line in verse 14, and Saul sought him every day, but God did not deliver him into his hand. Once again, this phrase comes up. It's God that is giving the victory. The writer in Samuel is trying to reiterate, when you win a victory against an enemy, it's not because of you, it's because God delivered them into your hand. God delivered the Philistines into David's hands, and God kept David out of Saul's hands. All right. And then we have the Jonathan part there. And then we go to Ziph. We know how to say that one.
Yeah.
We know how to say that one. Ziph. Ziph is not very far. Remember Adullam the cave, Hareth the forest. We were just at Keilah the city, and now we've gone to Ziph.
About 15 miles south of Keilah.
All right. And we changed scenes. We were with David and his men. Now we're back with Saul the king. We could be in Gibeah. I think that's probably reasonable to say we're in Gibeah. And the Ziphites come to Saul. And they say, is David not hiding with us in the strongholds at Horeth on the hill of, this is the one we don't know how to say. Hakilah, which is on the south of Jeshimon. Now then, O king, come down and according to all the desire of your soul to do so, and put in our part shall be to surrender him into the king's hand. May you be blessed by, and Saul said, may you be blessed of the Lord, for you have had compassion on me. Go now, make sure and investigate, and see his place where his haunt is, and who has seen him there, for I am told that he is very cunning. I highlighted that. To Saul, David is very cunning. From the reader's perspective, I think we would say he's righteous. He's asking God for help, and God is giving him help. But from Saul's perspective, it's not God that's helping him. He's just really smart and cunning. That's why I can't capture him. And I think it's really important that the writer puts this in here. Saul's perspective is, he doesn't have God. He's just smart. He's cunning.
So when David has the Lord on his side and has a pipeline to the Lord through Gad and through the priest, Saul doesn't have a chance of really catching him. And so David is warned that this is what Saul's planning to do and that he's coming to Ziph. And so then he goes 3 miles south again. He keeps moving farther south and farther east. He's going to end up over by the Dead Sea before long. But he goes to the wilderness of Maun.
Right. I'm going to go back to Dad's comment about going farther and farther south. Saul is based out of Gibeah. He's just trying to get away from where Saul's home is. Yep. It makes a lot of sense, and we'll see he does end up in the Dead Sea. So Maun, not Mahoon, whatever.
Maun.
So they sent out and went to Ziph ahead of Saul. Now David and his men were in the desert of Maon, in the Arabah south of Jeshimon. Saul and his men began to search, and David was told about it, and he went down to the rock and stayed in the desert of Maon. When Saul heard this, he went into the desert of Maon in pursuit of David. So, cat and mouse, the definition of Saul is looking for David. He's continuing to search for David.
And this time it's not a matter of God warning David. This time God actually intervenes, and Saul's getting close. And so then God sends the Philistines to attack the Israelites, and it pulls Saul away. He has to go and deal with the Philistines. That's verse 27. And so he leaves and gives up that attack. And verse 28 is kind of interesting. Then Saul broke off his pursuit of David and went to meet the Philistines. This is why they call this place Selah Hamalakoth. That's the name of a place in Arkansas, too, I might point out. Because the translation for Selah Hamalakoth is slippery rock. So it was the place that David slipped away from Saul. And so they named this rocky place that in honor of David's deliverance from Saul once again. And there's another psalm written about this time, Psalm 54, a maskil of David, when the Ziphites came and said to Saul, "Is not David hiding himself among us?" So we got lots of David's psalms that are about these passages where he's trying to avoid, written by David trying to avoid Saul. Also Psalm 18, a psalm of David, the servant of the Lord, who spoke to the Lord the words of this song in the day that the Lord delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. Now, the importance of that inscription is he does not consider Saul an enemy. He thanks God for delivering him from his enemies and from the hand of Saul. To us, that's maybe is not an important distinction, but to David, it was an important distinction because Saul was his king, and he did not consider Saul his enemy. Saul considered David an enemy, perhaps, but not the other way around. And so God the Ziphites, I think, were his enemies, and so God delivered him from them. So that's Psalm 18, and that's also about this period of time.
Yeah.
Okay.
That confuses me all. To say that Saul's not my enemy. This man has tried to, if I was in David's shoes, this man has tried to kill me multiple times. He's thrown spears at me. We're going to see he sends a force 5 times the size of my 600 men to try to kill me. And I still don't consider him my enemy. I just have to be punched in the face by one of my friends, and I'm not going to feel like they're my friend anymore. And he still considers Saul a non-enemy. Like it's culturally not something that we, I think, can identify with. So, okay. So from there, David delivers Saul from death. Now the tables have turned. So, actually, let's go back. Last verse. And David went up from there and lived in the strongholds of En-Gedi. En-Gedi. Now, En-Gedi is... So, verse 1, behold, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi. This is En-Gedi. It's the largest oasis along the western shore of the Dead Sea. It's one of 2 freshwater springs.
The whole wilderness area. Yeah.
Remember, the Dead Sea is a giant lake of what? Salt water. We were just in Hawaii. The first time you jump into the ocean and you get a mouthful of salt water, you're like, ugh. It's just not good. And the Dead Sea is even worse. It's got a higher salinity than the ocean. So if you don't like salt water in your mouth when you're in the ocean, you're not going to like drinking that salt water even more. But En-Gedi is one of 2 freshwater springs in the wilderness. It crops up as one of the biggest oases in the land. And it's inhabited for 3,500 years before Christ is on the scene. There's a picture of one of the oases.
Well, that's the spring of En-Gedi.
Yeah. And then En-Gedi literally means the spring of the goat. Because all around En-Gedi, you're going to have ibexes. And that's an ibex. Ibexi?
Ibex. Well, I don't know the plural.
Yeah. So that is...
I don't think it's ibex, but it's... Yeah.
Okay. Well, and there's an ibex. Do you want to tell us what this is, Dan?
Yeah, so we, in 23, Vicki and I went to Israel, and we went with Richard and Lori, and we were privileged to be able to go to En-Gedi. And this is a plaque in the parking lot of En-Gedi, and I'll blow up the English version in a minute, but it's in Hebrew and Aramaic and in English. And there's buses that come in there. Our tour bus came in, but buses of school kids come in there. Families come in carloads to visit En-Gedi. And what this says is almost every Israeli family
album.
Almost every Israeli family album has its photo of a trip to En-Gedi. In the collective Israeli imagination, En-Gedi means unspoiled, untamed nature, frothing water, leopards and ibex in the heart of the desert. En-Gedi has been a prime destination of annual school trips, youth movement hikes, and family visits for almost 100 years. En-Gedi is in all of our albums, beautiful, well-kept, and almost unchanged in an ever-changing world. This exhibit presents photographs taken by Israelis who visited En-Gedi from the beginning of the 20th century to the present. And when you come back out, you can kind of see the edge of those pictures, but those pictures go on for quite a while there. And most of them are a lot of them are in black and white because they were taken before I was born. But the Israelis really elevate the importance of En-Gedi to them. And I think, I thought, why would it be so important, En-Gedi? It's a spring, yes, it's in the wilderness, yes, but, to them, it was the place where David was delivered. Well, he was also delivered in the valley of Elah, where he fought Goliath and killed him. But you can go to the valley of Elah, and all you see is a little dried up brook and a wheat field. They don't make any importance of Elah, and that's where he killed Goliath. The importance of En-Gedi, in my mind, is it was around there that David had the opportunity to kill Saul, and we're going to see that in chapter 24. And he did not take that opportunity. His men urged him, kill Saul, we'll make you the king. He said, no, Saul is the Lord's anointed one. Meaning, Saul had been given his position by God, and I am not going to take away something from Saul that God gave to him. He is my anointed because he is the Lord's anointed. He is my, I serve him. And because of the way that David treated Saul, the Israelis love this area. And they make almost pilgrimage to this place. But as you start entering the area from the parking lot, it's a very desolate, desertous place. I took this picture because you can't see it. That right there is an ibex. I'm not pointing it out because it's a good picture of an ibex. I'm pointing out the fact of how steep and tall this is. It goes up for hundreds of feet, and the fact that there's large caves everywhere you look in this area. Caves that might have been the caves that David would have hidden from Saul. As you go on into it, you can see the steepness. There's an ibex up at the top of this area, and that's not showing the bottom. The bottom, it goes down quite a bit further. When David spoke to Saul, he spoke to him in such a way, and I always thought, why didn't Saul just go send his men after him? Well, if David's up there with his men and Saul's down in the bottom of this heading towards the spring, he's not going to be able to say, go get him. They'll be till tomorrow going to get him. So that would not be an easy task. This is a path that, as you go down or go up towards the spring, and you can kind of see how dry and, the plant and the vegetation around there is because of this little stream that comes out of this spring. But for the most part, it's a very desertous area. This is, actually, we were walking along and this ibex almost came up to us. And this was a young one. This is, they also had rock. Adam didn't want me to show this picture, but I thought this guy's cute. Rock hydrax. They're these little critters that, also live in that area. This is our group. You can probably make out Lori. I'm covering, their arm is covering up Richard, the back of my wife's head, but this is us walking towards that spring and having to go. We've been coming up this draw and we're going up towards the spring here. And then this is, again, you can kind of see up there some caves, around this. And this is where we're almost to the spring right here. And this is actually the spring. The spring is up above. It's flowing down in like a waterfall into this little shallow pool, and that is the spring of En-Gedi today. But it's in a very secluded place. You have to walk about a mile, or about an hour, and then all of a sudden you come around a corner and you hear water and you see it, but you don't realize it's there. And
all right, you got anything else?
Nope. I'm gonna stop there because
To me, En-Gedi is to the Israelites what Yellowstone is to us. Even to the point of, why do you go to Yellowstone? Go see Old Faithful. Why do you go to En-Gedi? To see the spring? Granted, our country's been around for 200 years. Their country's been around for much, much longer. And holds a much more significant history, contextual history to them. We haven't had any presidents inaugurated at Yellowstone, or any vice presidents spare the life of the president at Yellowstone, and that's what's going to happen here at En-Gedi.
Well, I think it's more than just Yellowstone, because it's the
I
place
agree.
where God allows David to vindicate himself with Saul. And David could have taken vengeance, but vengeance and vindication are two entirely different things. Vengeance is when you get your revenge against somebody and you punish them and you hurt them. Vindication is where you get justice and you show that I'm right. And all these people were saying, David's just trying to kill you, Saul. And here he proves to Saul, I'm not trying to kill you. If I wanted to kill you, I could have, right, in this instance. So he gets vindicated. His soldiers wanted him to kill Saul, and that would have been vengeance. But that's, I think, why this is important to the Israelis, is they see David as a man who was vindicated in this occasion and didn't take vengeance. Okay, go ahead, Adam.
All right. Have you unmuted the PC? Thanks, sir. Okay. So we'll see how this goes.
The Nubian ibex, or Yael in Hebrew, is a species of mountain goat that lives in desert climates. They're distinguished by their impressive curved horns. The males have beards, dark brown manes growing down their backs, and long, thick horns with deep grooves. The females are smaller, with thinner and more delicate horns. The ibex is an extremely agile animal with the ability to perch safely on narrow ledges and to jump several meters vertically and horizontally in a single leap. As the verse on our poster states, the tall mountains are dominated by the ibex. They spend much of their time darting among the cliffs, avoiding less nimble predators. In Israel, these beautiful animals can be seen in the wild in the Judean desert, especially near Ein Gedi, as well as in parts of the Negev such as Sde Boker, Mitzpe Ramon, and even in the mountains of Eilat. They're an endangered species due to hunting, reduction and division of their natural habitats, and other human activities. In the mid-20th century, they were almost extinct. Israel's nature protection authorities have worked hard to shield and preserve the ibex, and today it's estimated that there are about 2,500 Nubian ibex in the world, with about 1,000 of them here in Israel.
What I find interesting is the ibex probably witnessed what is about to happen between David and Saul. And those ibex are still in the region. And so you can go there and see an ibex and think, okay, that ibex is great-grandfather probably saw David yelling at Saul. Just nice. That's what I wanted to put in there for. Okay, so let's get to the meat of the issue. Now, verse 2, then Saul took 3,000 chosen men from Israel, a force 5 times as large as David's 600, and went to seek David and his men in front of the rocks of the wild goats. Those wild goats are those ibex. Saul, and he came to the sheepfolds on the way, and there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Remember how I said the writer of Samuel keeps hinting at themes in Judges? You guys remember there was a judge who killed a king who was relieving himself. Do you remember the judge? Ehud. Do you remember the king? I wouldn't have remembered it. I had to go look it up. It's Eglon. Eglon is relieving himself, and Ehud goes in, and it says Eglon is a rather rotund man. Ehud plunges the knife into Eglon while he's relieving himself, and it says the fat encloses over the knife. And then Ehud sneaks away, and the servants are scared to ask Eglon if he's done doing his business, and so they leave him alone, and it becomes embarrassingly long, right? Once again, what do you think the Israelites are going to think of Ehud? Is he a servant or is he a hero? He's a hero. And so the writer in Samuel continues to bring in these themes from Judges that remind us that David is a hero, but we'll continue to see David put himself in the place of a servant. And so Saul went in to relieve himself. Let's see here. The men said to David, behold, this is the day of which the Lord has said to you, behold, I am about to give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you. I have a thing in here about Genesis that I don't think I'm going to be able to get to because it just rang the bell. But that's a lie. Nowhere is it recorded in the Bible. It's maybe a half-truth. Maybe it did actually happen, but nowhere in the Bible have we recorded God actually making this promise to David. The men are misquoting God in the same way that the servant misquoted God to Eve in the garden. And then Eve went and ate the apple. So is David going to go kill Saul now from this misquote of God? The end of verse 4, then David arose and cut off the edge of Samuel's robe secretly. It came about afterwards that David's conscience bothered him because he had cut off the edge of Saul's robe.
The robe that he had removed. He wasn't wearing it at the time he cut it off. He had to remove it to use the facilities there, and they don't have facilities. They carried around a tool, and they would, dig a hole, relieve themselves.
Which is mandated in Leviticus.
Yes.
We know that
We
because
looked it up.
it's mandated in Leviticus that you take a tool, you dig a hole. They're very good hikers. They take out what they bring in, right?
Very hygienic.
Okay. What I find interesting here, David is just cutting the king's robe creates a crisis of conscience for David. That's the position he puts himself in, or that he sees himself. He's seen him call himself a servant. I don't think he sees himself as a usurper, because just cutting Saul's robe has caused him to be concerned. And so the men said to him, "Far be it from me." So he said to the men, "Far be it from me, because of the Lord, that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, since he is the Lord's anointed."
He looked at it as an act of disrespect and a fact that he had humiliated his king by cutting the corner of his robe. That's why it bothered David. Even though it was much better than killing Saul, but still, David felt that highly about his king, even though the king was trying to kill him, that it bothered his conscience.
And so we get to the last interaction between David and Saul in this chapter. David arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul. Saul's put his clothes back on. He's taking care of his business. He's moving on. And David calls out, "My Lord the king, why do you listen to the words of men saying, 'Behold, David seeks to harm you'? Behold, this day with your eyes have seen that the Lord had given you today into my hand in the cave." Back to this phrase, "the Lord has given into my hand." "And some said to kill you, but my eye had pity on you, and I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed." Once again, David's using very high language. He's calling him king. He's calling him Lord. He moves on and says, "Now my father." And this isn't just him placating. He's his father-in-law. He's married to his daughter. David is married to Saul's daughter. "Now my father, see, indeed, I see the edge of your robe. See the edge of your robe in my hand, for in that I cut off the edge of your robe and did not kill you. Know and perceive that there is no evil or rebellion in my hand."
That's the vindication. He's saying, all these guys saying this stuff about me, saying that I want to kill you, this is the reality.
"And I have not sinned against you, though you are lying in wait for my life to take it. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge me on you. But my hand shall not be against you. As the proverb of the ancients say, out of the wicked comes forth wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? Who are you pursuing? A dead dog, a single flea?" He's saying, why is the king of Israel going after a flea that's on a dead dog? How much more defacing can you be? David is saying, I am equivalent to a flea on a dead dog, and yet you chase me.
So in conclusion, David had won many battles, but one of his greatest victories occurred in that cave when he restrained himself and his men from killing Saul. And he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. Proverbs 16:32. But I think David is a good example to all of us, how we need to show restraint and especially, consult the Lord before we do anything rash. Okay, thank you for your time and attention.